Welcome, everybody. We still have attendees joining. This is the roundtable discussion on cultural heritage in war, making Ukraine's past and future, organized by Central European University's Cultural Heritage Studies program. My name is Dora Merai. I am a lecturer and researcher in the program, and I have my colleague Volodymyr Kulikov here as co-organizer, who is also a researcher in the program and also professor at Harazin Kharkiv National University in Ukraine, the university which was founded in 1804 as one of the oldest universities in Ukraine, and the building of which was bombed yesterday. As CEU, previously located in Budapest and now in Vienna, we have numerous Ukrainian faculty members and students, also alumni. And besides the actual practical help the university is organizing for these people and their families, we also think that it is our task to initiate academic discussion of various aspects of this situation. And today we invited two experts from Ukraine, Katerina Busol and Sofia Dyak, and as well as Cornelius Hjortsson from Sweden, to discuss the role of heritage in making Ukraine's past and future. Unfortunately, so Sofia is still in Ukraine, and unfortunately the internet cable was cut just now. So it seems that she cannot join our panel at the moment. We still hope that there will be some solution so that she can join, she can find internet, but nonetheless we start our panel now, and you can ask your questions in the chat box, and Volodymyr will moderate the chat box. He will bring in your questions to the discussion, so you can type your questions anytime. And the format will be that I ask our panelists to start with a short statement, and then we will also ask our questions, and you can also ask yours. First, I would like to invite Katerina to give some kind of statement on the situation. She's a Ukrainian lawyer specializing in international human rights, humanitarian law, criminal law, transnational justice, gender and cultural heritage protection. She holds a PhD from Institute of International Relations of Kiev National Taras Shevchenko University and a Master of Laws degree from University of Cambridge. She turned her practice in public international law with the outbreak of armed conflicts in Ukraine. And she consulted the Ukrainian side on the Scythian gold case. Maybe you heard about this, that there was the exhibition Crimea, Gold and Secrets of the Black Sea in Amsterdam in 2014. And the treasures were loaned by museums from Kiev and from Crimea. And due to Russia's annexation of Crimea, the ownership of the treasures became debated, and this resulted in a legal case. Katya has also several prestigious fellowships, including the Kennan Institute in Washington, D.C., and she is also a member of Chatham House, an independent policy institute headquartered in London, whose mission is to provide commentary on world events and offer solutions to global challenges, working towards a fair and just world. So I would like to give the word to Katya now.
Thank you very much, Dora. Thank you to all the organizers, and thanks a lot to the audience, first and foremost, for your interest, because what we are witnessing today is unprecedented in its scale, but it started much long time ago. It started in 2014. So in my brief introductory remarks, I will point out, of course, at the most recent violations that Russian armed forces perpetrated against Ukrainian cultural heritage in this new wave of aggression announced by President Putin a week ago. But I will also touch upon the other violations that have been perpetrated by Russian occupying authorities in Crimea and in the territories of eastern Ukraine since 2014. And finally, I will discuss the efforts of the Ukrainian state and civil society throughout these years, and in particular now, during this particularly strenuous week of intense hostilities, to preserve and protect cultural heritage and to document the alleged violations. As you know, unfortunately, there are many instances of indiscriminate shelling in Ukraine aimed at civilian objects and aimed at special objects such as the cultural heritage sites. So there has been a report about a museum in Ivankiv that has the paintings by a impressive Ukrainian female artist, Maria Primachenko, which has been destroyed to the ground. Apparently, there are reports that the artworks have been saved by the staff of the museum who managed to relocate them. But of course, the fact that hopefully the paintings are saved, or part of the paintings are saved, does not justify the attack on a civilian object and an attack on a cultural heritage site. Then, of course, it has been widely covered by the media, the attack at the TV tower in Kiev, which actually damaged largely the Babin Yar heritage site, which is the important commemorative place of one of the most poignant and awful pages of history of the mass execution of the Jewish population of Kiev during the World War II, as well as the Kiev intelligentsia. And that was a symbolic act that the place, the site, the place of silence and commemoration, commemorating the innocent Jewish people, was badly damaged during the attack of the Russian forces a couple of days ago, who seem to or claim to carry the policy of denazification, of alleged denazification of Ukraine. So the irony is there. Finally, of course, as the hostilities proceed, all the other museums, archives, libraries are in danger. There hasn't been, at least according to the public reports, mass evacuation of artifacts of the archives from all the museums. And because the hostilities develop in a very dynamic manner, of course, it probably wasn't physically possible or feasible to relocate all of the artifacts allegedly in danger. However, what we are witnessing now, and these acts of indiscriminate attacks on protected sites, can constitute war crimes and can be potentially investigated and prosecuted, including by the International Criminal Court. And a couple of days ago, as you also know from the media, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court said that the court was one step closer to a full investigation of the situation in Ukraine. And hopefully he will also look at this indiscriminate attacks at cultural heritage sites. But all these acts, they are the continuation of the policies and issues that have been perpetrated by the Russian occupying authorities since 2014. So all the cultural heritage sites, Ukrainian cultural heritage sites in occupied Crimea, were turned unlawfully into Russian property as with the occupation. Also, there is an instance of a so-called destructive restoration of the principal cultural heritage site of the Crimean Tatar people, the Bakhchisarai Palace, and the restoration, according to the expert opinions of many professionals who deal with the architecture and restoration, they claim that A, that type of work was not needed, and B, it is conducted in such a way that doesn't just preserve but destroys the historical and cultural authenticity of that unique site. And in that, we can see an element of a destructive persecutorial policy of the occupying authorities, because there have been many reports of credible human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch, or the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission, numerous Ukrainian human rights NGOs, saying that there is a larger persecutorial policy with respect to Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians who oppose occupation. And the part of that policy was to encroach on their cultural heritage, to also modify the historical and the cultural fabric of Crimea. So it is important to point out that the awful violations and indiscriminate attacks that we are seeing at the time being are the continuation of the previously existing policies. And I must point out that the already mentioned prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, in his, and at that time it was she, in her preliminary findings on the preliminary examination of the situation in Ukraine, said that there was a crime of unlawful appropriation of property, including of cultural heritage sites. So again, we're hoping that once the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court hopefully launches a full-scale investigation into a situation in Ukraine, he will look into the whole scope of the violations that happened since 2014 until the last week, and of course, which happened during this active phase of hostilities. My third point would be about the efforts domestically which are being done to preserve cultural heritage. From what's known from the public reports, many museum employees, including those who are in zones of active hostilities, do their best to actually go to work, to be at their workplace and ensure the preservation. They suffer from the acute lack of basic necessities needed not just for packing and moving the objects, but even the basic necessities which would ensure their own existence, like food and sanitary products, because as you know, many areas, especially in eastern and southern Ukraine, have been gravely affected by hostilities, and there was no possibility to allow the delivery of food and medical supplies. So at the time being, apart from providing, of course, the financial support needed for packing and moving the objects which haven't been moved safely, the humanitarian corridors are needed to support physically the existence of those museum professionals, who many of whom leave their homes and bomb shelters to be with their museums and with the artifacts that they preserve. The important initiatives also unfold in the field of documentation. So many human rights organizations of Ukraine united and publicly announced the massive documentation campaign of all violations perpetrated by the aggressor, including on cultural heritage. So there have been many basic guidelines how to document the violations, how to record a video, how to interview a witness. Of course, it is very basic, but it's something that ensures the preservation of the first-hand experience, of the first-hand witnessing of the violation, which hopefully will then end up in a domestic in Ukraine or a foreign domestic proceeding, or at the proceeding at an international criminal court, or potentially an international tribunal created specifically for Ukraine. The amount and of danger and destruction and the threat of further destruction is very high. So that is also very important that more and more specialized professional associations join and both make the statements about their non-acceptance of such a policy with respect to cultural heritage, but also so that they technically and physically support their colleagues from the cultural heritage field on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to again call the attention that the audience's attentive attention, that you can post your questions in the chat box. And I would like to ask now our second panelist, Cornelius Hjortsson, to make his statement. Cornelius Hjortsson is professor of archaeology and holds the UNESCO chair on heritage futures. Also, he's the director of graduate school in contract archaeology at Linnaeus University in Kalmar, Sweden. His research interests lie in contemporary archaeology, heritage theory, and heritage futures. He has initiated and participated in several fascinating projects, which I'm not gonna list now, but I would like to mention one. Cornelius was co-investigator in the project, the research program Heritage Futures, and also led the theme Uncertainty. And this project addressed how heritage practitioners can understand and navigate in a world of uncertainty and change, and how historical legacy, which we leave behind and also construct, can benefit the future generation the most. He has been collaborating for many years with the Swedish nuclear fuel and waste management company and other major stakeholders in the nuclear waste sector, which is an example for this type of cross-sectoral cooperation, which he is promoting in order to ask new questions about heritage, which are sometimes really unusual questions. And this is why we invited Cornelius to this panel, because we would like to talk about the future, both the past and the future that is creating by present actions, also including the war, actions in the war. And we would like to ask new and unusual questions. So Cornelius, please.
Well, thank you very much, Dora, for this introduction and for this occasion, because I think, as Katerina also pointed out, this is really valuable in such a situation to have the opportunity to discuss with colleagues and students and anybody interested really those issues that concern us all. And I should also say that I'm not specifically linked to Ukraine or to Russia for that matter. So I take a step back and want to raise a few more general issues that have, of course, a very clear connection to this conflict also, but still on a more abstract level, maybe. So let's get into what I've prepared here. And there's one thing which I just need to say immediately, even though I hold a UNESCO chair. What I'm going to say here is not the view of UNESCO and doesn't represent what they believe or do. Now, what I want to start with is that this is just a random picture from the conflict. This is what war looks like, or one of the images that represents war. And I think one has to agree that a war has only losers. And this includes the soldiers, the civilians, but also society at large. And it covers, of course, especially the Ukraine, but also Russia, which will be affected in enormous ways, although in different ways, but still it will not be, and it's not now life as usual in Russia. So this is something which I think we all know, but which is also important to think about in such a context. Now, as we focus about the future, then it's also evident that such a conflict impacts the future in many profound ways. And there are many losers also in the future. There will be parents no longer alive. There will be losses of infrastructure. There will be probably for a whole generation, the quality of life generally be affected. And that also includes both countries, the Ukraine and Russia. And of course, I should add maybe Belarus as well, to the extent that they are increasingly seem to be involved. So the question is, if this is our image of war, and of course that's the image of the 20th century and the wars that have been fought at that time, and if anybody of you, which I'm sure many of you have been to Verdun and other places like this, then this is the message you take away from that. Don't do wars. So the question I want to take up here is, and then why did this war start? And on one level, it's an easy question. On another level, it's not so easy, because there are a few things that we don't maybe address enough in this context at this time. Now this is the one quote I will make from UNESCO. This is a famous quote which you've all seen before, which is part of the Constitution of UNESCO from 1945. Where it says that since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. And of course, today we would say not men, but humans, because it's an inclusive statement. So it's the profound insight of UNESCO, which I think still holds true. And of course, this was written by Tristan Saar. The insight is that we need to look about into the minds of people. How are people thinking who are doing stuff like what Katarina has just been illustrating as well, what we all see in the media every day. Now, in specific terms, Putin and Russia invaded Ukraine. We've all seen this over the past week. But why did they do this? What happened in the minds of Putin and the people he works with that made them do that? This is not as easy as maybe it seems. Now, there is a reasoning that he adopts himself, and that is well known and often rehearsed over the last years. And if you Google, you find this article, a 7,000-word article written by Putin himself. It seems, at least he claims authorship, but it sounds like he's written it himself, on the historical unity of Russians and Ukrainians. That's from last summer, but he's rehearsed the same points recently several times as well. This is his reasoning for the point of the war. And as the title suggests, basically he says it's one country, so it should be one country. Also in a sort of in a military way, which is what he tries to accomplish at the moment. But it rests on a particular view of history, of course, a disputed view, and many people have different views. But it is one view based on an interpretation of how he interprets several key events over time in this part of the world. Right. But every war has at least two parties, otherwise there wouldn't be a war. So it's just as important to ask, why did Ukraine fight back? Because if they hadn't done that in the massive way that we now see is happening, then there wouldn't be a war either. So why are they fighting back? And again, it seems obvious, but I don't think it's as obvious as it seems. This is just another random headline, which you see many. Zelensky, president of the Ukraine, is all the time in media news, and this is from 6 days ago, so some time ago now, where he says the key message is we will defend ourselves, and behind him here is the national flag. And of course, these are phrases and also symbols that we see daily and that underline the message of Zelensky. So the basic message, if we should summarize it in a few words, is that Ukraine fights back because of the importance to maintain the freedom of Ukraine as a nation. I think that's what it comes down to, and it doesn't surprise anybody. But I think it is important to focus on that. Now, so we can say that it is national identities and conflicting views of history that led to war on both sides. And these sort of reasonings are of a kind that they seem inevitable for both sides. As of Putin has been talking about this since 2014 and probably longer in different ways. And it was many commentators now say those the Russia specialists on our media, but I'm sure they're on many media. They say that Kissinger has written this essay about this, where he also says this was only a conflict waiting to be happening, something that he already expected, Kissinger, in 2014 would happen, and many other experts happened. And of course, in the same way, you would expect Ukraine to fight back. It seems to be the only option they have. So, and this is the thing with war. It's inevitable, or it seems inevitable to people, and has done that many times in the past. And that's why we have wars. And I think this is not something we should accept, certainly not for the long term. And this is what we need to work with. Now, just one short word on how did the world react to that? Well, it's obvious there's all sorts of support for Ukraine in many different ways, humanitarian ways, but also military ways. At the same time, there's a whole range of boycotts and punishment for Russia, Russian economy, banking system. You've seen it all, many different things. And even that seems inevitable. There doesn't seem to be any other way of doing it. It's only a question of, which punishment, which sanction do you impose now and which do you do next week? It's those sort of things. It's pragmatics, but that the principle is like this didn't take much discussion. So even this bit is inevitable, which of course contributes to the conflict we're seeing at the moment. Right, so what are the consequences for the future? This is a bit more speculative, but I think it's maybe not too hard to think that for the next years, probably decades, we see more war rhetorics, certainly in Europe and probably other parts that sort of border on Russia. We've heard the most amazing statements from the Swedish Prime Minister yesterday, or was it 2 days ago, when she gave a speech to the nation. Sweden is not known for that sort of rhetorics. Amazing how quickly this changes even here. We see rearmament throughout Europe. Germany made a historic decision to change its policy since the Second World War and now invest massively in military expenses. And this is not just a budgetary item. This is a way of thinking about the world that is suddenly changing and everybody's in favor. We will also see less global trust for good reasons, of course. It's all very understandable. People will not, or countries, societies will not trust Putin's Russia for the foreseeable future, maybe forever. There will be less collaboration between many countries because you always wonder, can we trust them? China will be involved. How do we see China? Or China's not Russia, but can we trust them? Might they do the same? There are obviously friendships between the nations and so on. So this will affect maybe the rest of our lifetime. And there are some people that argue that we are at the moment in at a watershed in history where something very profound is changing how we see the relations between societies and how we interact with each other, in fact, globally. So the question I want to raise is one which I hope we all think about, at least occasionally these days. What would we need to focus on for having a different future? Because this is not a desirable future. I don't think anybody wants that. We want all the opposite of what I've just described probably will happen for the next years or decades. Now, and this is my final section here. Now, what we want and need is a common agenda for the people of the world, obviously. And there's a document that was published in September last year by the Director General or Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres. And so he published this document, which is exactly meant to be a common agenda. And I think it's worthwhile just to take out 2 points of this document because they touch on the agenda, heritage and culture more generally. Now, one point that is being made in this report is that Guterres says, and the United Nations say, that it is time to think for the long term and to be better prepared for the challenges ahead. This is the first time that the United Nations put future thinking on the top agenda of the global agenda for on the agenda for the world. So we need to think about which challenges do we see and how do we address them. And the question of peace is, of course, a central one and becomes ever more important at the moment, and certainly through the current conflict in Ukraine, we'll see. That's the first point. And this is the second point. The same report argues also that it is time to re-embrace global solidarity and find new ways to work together for the common good. Now, this I think we should not forget. So as much as we want to sort of find a solution at the moment that brings peace and security to Ukraine and the region, I think we also need to think more broadly, how do we create global solidarity in this situation? And how do we find and get more attention and more initiatives to work together for the common good? And yes, is a vision, and maybe it's idealist, but I think it's an ideal well worth working for. And ultimately, this is the agenda of the United Nations and has been for so many years, which now is sort of gearing up for the post-2030 agenda. And let's hope that some of these points will be part of that in the new sustainable development agenda in a few years. So here's my point. What I think from a history and heritage perspective should be among the things for us to focus on in this context. So our common agenda for the world, I think, must include, for one, a history that unites in peace, not a history that unites by force. Obviously, how do we write about the past so that we find commonalities and connections and build trust and solidarity between each other, rather than sort of enforce things that people do not agree with, and that will create more conflicts and divisions. And the second part that is linked to this: how do we create a heritage that does not divide but unites? And all the national heritage is by definition about nations, and it's about us and them, and how every nation is distinct from any other nation. And unfortunately, there are far too many examples where national heritage is used to justify war. And in this case, this is also a dimension of the present conflict in a particular way, which I'm not going to go into now, but it is part of the conflict. That's why the flags are raised. That's why we're concerned about the museums, about the architecture, about the heritage everywhere. That's why this is part of the reporting that we at the moment see from the region. So all of this is not a reality at the moment, but I would put to you and to the audience here that something we should think more about. How do we create such a world? How do we work to such aims that I really think everybody can sign up to and that we can agree with? And this is the kind of future that is not on everybody's mind at the moment, as there are other things closer to us that we also need to focus on. And it's also not necessarily, I get when I talk like this, many people say, oh, but the world is not like this. And that means that we are just not used to thinking about the world in those terms. We make a number of assertions how the world is or has to be, that we may not like it, but that we have to live with. Now, I put to you that we should not accept that. And this is the kind of unimagined future that maybe we should get better at imagining and working for. And so a long path ahead, and it's not an easy task, and there will be many challenges to solve along this. I think let's not forget this in the present situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we have Sofia here, luckily with proper internet. So it was just a little change then in the program, because the plan was to invite first Sofia and then Cornelius to make the statement, but now then we can have Sofia, but let me first introduce her. Sofia Dyak is a historian and sociologist. She's the director of the Center for Urban History in Lviv, Ukraine, which is a great organization. Her research focuses on post-war urban recovery and transformation in Eastern Europe, heritage infrastructures and practices in socialist cities, and their legacies. She holds an MA from our university, CEU, in history, and a PhD in sociology from the Institute of Philosophy and Sociology of the Polish Academy of Sciences. She has had several prestigious fellowships in Europe and the US, including the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, and her present research addresses the late 20th century local turn in Ukraine and the network of local history museums. And another area of her work is public history. She curated exhibitions and educational projects related to rethinking the past, especially in public, urban public spaces. And this is why we thought about inviting Sofia, as also representing the work done in the Lviv Center, to have the insider and local perspective of what people in Ukraine think about their heritage, or what they think as their heritage. So, Sofia, please.
Thank you, Dora. So to begin with, I would like to say that initially my colleague had to speak here, Irina Sklokina, and the very fact that she's not with us because she's taking care of her family, trying to evacuate from Kharkiv and going to Odessa to take the kid she just adopted. It actually puts, just mentioning it not for the personal stories here, but set up a context in which I'm speaking, and I think in which we are speaking about heritage, because at the moment we are acting on the choices between people, and people's life and people's welfare and health, and it actually makes all the questions we asked about heritage even more acute. So I actually thought about a couple of points, and they are, last moment preparation, but also on the go as the situation is here, very much changing. So, as we know, heritage is always about selection. So then, in the moment of urgency and extreme conditions, so how and who is making the choice of what to save and what to hide? And I think this is also where we do see very strikingly how heritage itself is a very contested field where, do museum collections which are elite culture have more value than things which are not elitist, for example, or not artistic or other kind of value? So what do we prioritize, institutional heritage or collections that are family? And some of my, so like this couple of days ago, I was talking with director of Ukrainian Institute, Volodymyr Sheiko, who took car and is now working at our center. The Ukrainian Institute is a cultural diplomacy unit at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He, what you take when you pack your car, he took family album. And, that's also heritage. This is actually the moment also to reflect on that, I think, in present circumstances, but also more generally. And I think that, heritage is also very much about power. And we saw how power can be a practice of abuse and a practice and mistreated. And heritage is a language in which aggression is right now also history, and heritage is carried on. And we also do have, I'm not going to dwell as a historian on the speech by the president of Russia, but actually I think that it actually makes us think how globally we have still a lasting and present veneration for high culture and unjust distribution of what we value, and little sensitivity. Just a colleague of mine, a cultural journalist, draw attention how Tretyakovka gallery just put an ornament of Ukrainian embroidery from their collection, which actually shows how much arrogance of high institution, elitist institution do have, and how actually heritage as a field, as we know that it was as a critical heritage discourse, have been very much addressing these issues, that heritage is not intrinsically and by definition something that is conflictless, not something that is only positive, that actually heritage as a social practice can be very divisive, and Cornelius just pointed out to that. So my question actually also, if you think about future, is we have a capacity from having this very much from below and very much social community level enhanced in the way we see heritage. And the source of solidarity, because how we do is it a solidarity from people to people, from small community to small community, where we can share some of our experiences, and this is very much, I think, in the moment of big crisis or big tragedy is happening, or disaster. We are in a disaster right now, living, and catastrophe. War is such one, of course. This is actually not. It's also a moment when we can reach critically to very basic notions and actually think through them. That's something that I wanted to just to very beginning to mention. Another part of my talk, I can just briefly say what is done in Lviv. So as you know or may know, Lviv is in Western Ukraine, so we are very close to what is now the EU and NATO border. It's also turned. While we have air raids, the city has not been bombed. The city is turning into refugee transit point. Some refugees are staying in the city. And there are actually, and museums are dealing with what the museums are right now doing. They take their holding, what is on display and above the ground and put it under the ground. They do have manuals, some of them having manuals of how to do that, coming from 2014. And probably other, other instructions. One actually has to also think that there is a great solidarity from Polish museums was extended in helping, but at the same point, one actually also that rings about that part of what is heritage in Lviv is also part of Polish heritage. So I couldn't. Then I was thinking about that. These days I had lots of recollection from the World War II and partly World War I. And I'm, one of the greatest collection of library and manuscript, and also collection of Ossolineum library, which was divided after Second World War between Soviet Union, Soviet Ukraine, and Communist Poland. Collection split. There's lots of effort. There are memoirs of how people were hiding, and also in art gallery here. So I read these memoirs, years ago when doing my dissertation, and that's like kind of pop up all the time right now. How must these people, Mieczyslaw Gambarowicz and others felt here? And what does that, make me think about? And honestly, I do not know what to hide, what to expect, really, in this very building that we are working. It's a Secession 1905 building. And we do have stained glasses. And I do not know where should we do first, to arrange a shelter in our conference room to give people a night, or actually put plywood and secure stained glasses. So just to give it very down to the earth. We've got 7 days. So in the end, we did both, but we first secured place for people, and then we did it for our stained glasses. But if you would have something more precious than stained glasses, I think the decision, how you make decision. So right now, so we have museums working on that. We do have stained glasses and sculptures, protected in the city, and as the city downtown is UNESCO heritage list, the question is about bomb rates. You do not know, and the city is vulnerable. And what does that mean? Are we talking about UNESCO heritage site hit, if probability, or people? Because what is Lviv right now, a heritage site or a refugee camp, but kind of, camp or whatever, because they people living in different apartments, theaters turned into shelters, galleries, which do not have museum collections, are turned into shelter. So actually how we define stuff. There are some questions which Dora collected. I don't know, Dora, let me know if I should address them right now quickly, or you would like me to stop so that Volodymyr and Katerina would pick up,
Thank you, Sofia. I think let's switch to audience questions now, because we have quite many questions to all three of you. So I am passing the word to Vladimir now.
Yes, thank you. So there are many questions, and I think mostly these are three categories. So there are questions to clarify what is going on now, then questions what to do in short-term respect, and who will pay the damage and so on, and of course this long-term perspective about which Cornelius was talking about. I think I will ask Katerina to clarify a couple of things, and the question by Flavio. Flavio is asking, is there a possibility for a strategic attack and destruction of cultural heritage by Russian troops? So do we know about such examples? Especially, this is already from me the remark that they were mentioning that they are fighting with nationalists here in Ukraine, so that they are targeting deliberately some Ukrainian national pieces of heritage. And the second question, probably also to Katerina, have cultural heritage professionals consider an evacuation of cultural property so far?
Thank you very much, colleagues, and thank you, Volodymyr. As regards the first question, there have been reports in the media about the alleged targeted attack at the St. Sophia Cathedral, which is a UNESCO World Heritage List site, an ancient dome with its bells in the center of Kiev, which is, hopefully will not happen, and luckily hasn't happened so far. But at least the reports about that have been there in the media, which actually would contravene Russia's narrative, because they would want to preserve the historical Orthodox pieces, which fit their historical narrative. I personally haven't seen other reports on the media, especially concerning the so-called, Nazi heritage of the Ukrainians. On the contrary, ironically, as I mentioned, the Babyn Yar site, the grave place where thousands of Jews were exterminated during the World War II, got affected by Russia's targeted attack on the TV tower, which was situated nearby. Even the indiscriminate shelling of the civilian areas that includes the cultural heritage sites has been enormous, and there was no justification for such a shelling. So those neither ordinary civilian objects nor museums which were destroyed to the ground, they were not used by the Ukrainian armed forces, as far as known, in support of the military activities. So nothing waived their immunity, nothing waived their protection from shelling. As regards the evacuation, unfortunately, in a way, Ukrainian authorities, like the international community, they focused on Crimea and Donbass up until the last week. So the effort was increasingly there to deal with cultural heritage issues, but it was really focused on the occupied areas, documenting the violations there, raising the awareness, even because there was a question about the General Assembly resolutions on Ukraine and on Crimea and how they've changed. Only the recent resolutions of the General Assembly on the human rights situation in Crimea started mentioning the violations concerning cultural heritage. And that was a big impact of the joint work of the state and civil society in terms of documenting and raising awareness, and actually even opening domestic proceedings into such violations and then submitting evidence to the International Criminal Court. Parallel to that, of course, certain emergency measures, as far as publicly known, were taken in other museums around Ukraine. But again, as far as I'm aware, there haven't been massive evacuations. And as you can see from the scale, from the spread of the hostilities now, such evacuation must have been enormous. So many probably neighboring countries should have been involved, and such planning, as I understand, was not there. What message we should get from it? Well, of course, that Russia's aggression is unprecedented in its scale and intensity, but also, of course, that more preventive measures should be at the priority of state policy, not just within the cultural heritage domain, but in other fields as well, because that's of course a huge logistical and infrastructural endeavor which cannot be implemented, when the bombings happen all around the country. Once the president of Russia has announced this special military operation in Ukraine. This is what I can tell you, but I can tell you that the museum professionals are amazing, and the fact that under bombings they go there and try to pack things and move them to the storages more, it's just exceptional. And I've seen again with Auschwitz that they're offering special fellowship schemes to help the professionals from Ukraine. This is great. But what is also really needed is the provision of the actual resources, like the packaging materials, the transportation materials, and of course the food supplies for those museum professionals to also have the strength to do the preservation there on the ground under fire.
Okay, then we have many questions about what to do now, and Rob Dale is asking what can we do to support libraries, museums, and archives, and how we can help to preserve cultural heritage. And I assume that we're talking about global international community, what we can do. And I would like to address this question to Sofia, because I could see that you have a page on your website listing that what can be done to help now in the situation.
I mean, as far as I can see, and I'm also only seeing a part of picture, the most of academic, aid and solidarity is directed, first of all, to people, and offering possibilities in different places in countries to have a home, and for some time affiliation of work. There was also a request, from Polish museums that they can help, but logistics, maybe it's already set up, but I don't know, to be so. And as now border is basically mainly working as people getting out, and humanitarian, medical, and military or paramilitary double usage staff protecting for soldiers is moving. I think that we also have to think that there's a border, EU border with 2 checkpoints, and that's now everything is simplified, but it's still there. No, I mean, it's not like you drive, we have EU border, and it's not lifted, so to make a flow possible. Then, of course, it's about organization. It's about, even if you don't follow the guides of what has to be for the painting or for the sculpture or for porcelain or for fabric, it's about unloading, uploading, unloading, carrying, and again, it's all about choices. So I think that this emergency is right now what this is about, hiding and protecting things from in case of air raid and bombing. I think that's basically the main line. And then there's another question, which is about digital. And here where we do have, and I can share some of the experience, and probably, I'm so glad to see you, Volodymyr, and thinking about you. And then in 2013 we had the project that you were running documenting visual materials of industrial heritage, not accessible because they were under, unreachable in cities and towns and museums, which became, Katya will help, or how to legally define which became occupied and uncontrolled by Ukrainian authorities. So digitalization seems to be a good, and there's a lot of digitalization. So again, we were recently in for almost 2 years a project with Ira Sklokina, my colleague, and on archiving post-industry, which was set to digitize images in several museums in Donetsk and region, Mariupol, Pokrovsk, Kramatorsk. And we have all of that in our server, and we are right now working on how to get it, to in the evening. I will have a meeting with the colleagues from Luxembourg that we could double our server to their storage. So that's actually what we are working on. This is some terabytes of information, and of course our first meeting on Thursday was what we do about our physical colleagues, and then where we are on that. And actually we had this meeting on Monday, so we actually were talking on Monday, what should we do in case? And we thought that we start uploading to the cloud. We know who is in charge of taking the server and taking it along somewhere and splitting into parts, because there are 2 parts of server, the backup and the main one. And we are a small institution. So if you think about all these projects, which are a big one, and we're also thinking about lots of small initiatives. And I absolutely hear, that somebody wrote that this is not the time to divide between high and low culture. But I think that, just the moment also to think how we prioritize. And in a time of emergency, one is acting in its nearest scope. So if you're in the museum, you say, what is at the museum? If you're working at NGO, which was doing oral history, you just, try to preserve this oral history stories and make them available. So that's basically what what we are seeing. What is different that we have almost, I think that within a day or two, we'll have 1 million of people who are refugees. And this is the question also about people who are carrying their stories, their lives, their communities, what we call intangible. And that will be the whole question looking at us in the future, how we do about that. What actually heritage as a field can help us, because heritage is a lot about community, and then communities are scattered, what we do. So I'm off.
Thank you, Sofia. Dora, you said you have a question?
Yes, it's rather a comment that we have here Sebastian, who exactly wrote about this, that they have a project on backing up digital collections. So Sebastian, you can, I think, write to the Lviv Center and somehow unite forces also, not how to have not just the center, but maybe through them to reach other organizations. Sofia mentioned this issue of prioritizing that is very much something there every day for heritage experts, or every moment now. And I would like to ask Cornelius to comment on this. When we save heritage for the future, or decide what to pass on, how do we prioritize?
well, to give you the full answer on that, I think I'll come back for another lecture. But I'll answer one aspect of that in relation to maybe some of the questions that we've seen here. And especially, I would like to start with Mariana's question in the chat, but because I assume that probably many people are thinking of that, and I want to make 2 points here. The first one is she writes that the global agenda oriented towards peace has been pursued for decades now internationally, but without success. Now, I actually would like to dispute that. And there's plenty of data around, which is in the public domain. There's never been a period in recent centuries with so few war deaths and wars globally. The numbers are going down dramatically over in the bigger picture since the end of the Second World War. And there are many factors that contribute to that, but certainly the United Nations are one major factor in this. So the rhetoric now to say, oh, it has never worked, it means sort of we're falling back on the assumption that, oh, human beings, they always kill each other. This is the natural way. It must be like that. And I refuse to accept that. I think the last, 80 years have shown that it actually is possible to make huge improvements on this on a global level. And I think that's the path we should continue to go. This is not disputed data. There's the site I recommend is called ourworldindata.org. And there you see the statistics for all of this. So that's the first point. Now, the second point is the one now for the future. What do we do? Which is the second part here of Mariana's point. What must change in order to come up with an agenda that is both enforceable and successful? And it also relates to the question, anonymous question here in the Q&A, on how do we create unity when there are so many real differences between groups of people. Now, I think the key to understand is that the way we look at heritage today is not the only possible way to look at heritage, even though it's sort of naturalized and it is institutionalized, and we have legislation and we have national museums and we have educational curricula that are all enforcing this ideas that there are different groups and different nations that have sort of complicated histories in different ways, but we're not questioning the parameters that sort of govern this understanding of history. Now, yes, there are many different groups, but not probably in the bigger picture, very few of the groups that are significant in human histories are actually connected to territory. And for example, the group that is meeting here at the moment, this is a professional group. We all, well, to some extent professional, to some extent we are a joint interest in heritage and history. And that's how we meet. And we certainly feel like a community, even though many of us have never met before, and we certainly do not live in the same place, and we don't feel we have to. And yet we are a community, and there's any number of communities like this. We have all sorts of interests and connections to people, increasingly globally, but certainly not only locally. So the point, who was, I can't remember, I think Sofia was talking about the significance of local communities, right? Now the point is the communities are the key here, not the local, because communities are less and less local. And we need to build a heritage around the idea of communities, and they will go in between national boundaries. They already do all the time. It's nothing new. It happens in popular culture, in high culture as much as low culture. In sports, that's why the boycotts are so significant at the moment. Well, all parts of our life is where we connect with people, not necessarily based on any kind of territorial unity. So we can drop that, I think, or make it very insignificant in the world of heritage. And that would allow us to see the many connections, what unites us rather than what divides us between, depending on where we live, where we happen to live. Now, it's not about either or, but it may be a question of deprioritizing one thing and looking a bit more at something else. And I think this is a real possibility on how we write the past, but also how we construct heritage, how we manage heritage, and how we look at the future, because the future is it's not about national futures if we want a future of peace. That's my message here today, and that's also why I certainly do not represent the view of UNESCO, because all the United Nations organizations, of course, as the name says, based on the very idea of nation states that carry them, members of them, and that was a situation that was, and there were good reasons for that after the Second World War. But today the world is different, and this makes less and less sense. So that doesn't mean we should do without them, but it means we need to complement their activities in new formats in the new organizations, and they need to transcend the idea of the nation. So that's my message.
Shall I ask a few more questions?
Yes, sorry, I was just struggling with unmuting myself. So thank you, Cornelius. And our event officially ends at 2:40, but if you have 10 more minutes to stay, then we can cover a few more questions. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Vladimir.
It's difficult to choose because there are really lots of very good questions and remarks, but I think I would like to ask this question. Initially, I wanted to ask Cornelius, but maybe I can ask also Sofia and Cornelius if you want to pick it up later. A question by Alice Choike, and the question is about how can cultural heritage deal with the fake news in the in fake news that will continuously generated by the aggressor. So cultural heritage and fake news.
Do you want me to start on that?
Yes, please.
And I will be short. I don't think that's a question where heritage has a specific expertise, and this is about many other things, media and critical thinking and so on. But I also would say that fake news is not just part of the aggressor. I think in a war there is propaganda on both sides, and I think and nobody can prove this at the moment, but I think as the numbers of losses, for example, are exchanged, I don't think any of them are true at this point, and that's the way the wars are fought. So I think we need just a general wisdom and critical thinking, and that applies to heritage as much as to anything else. So, I think that's probably all I can say. Maybe one of the others here on the panel has something to add.
Mm-hmm. Sofia, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, yeah, so I think that, when we critical thinking, obviously, like also this critical heritage studies, you not only look at what is at your face, but you also try to ask where it's coming, who has made decision, but I mean, what is the interest, what are the power, and you actually try to analyze, and that's what helps. On the other hand, I think that, I do think that there are both sides in the war, but there is also a huge difference. And while we cannot verify, and also it's for me, I cannot verify what I'm receiving as official updates from my government. I can't, there is no way for me to say that there are 1,000 or 1,500 or 500, that's. But actually what I can do and what I'm doing, actually, I'm looking at the whole package, of the news I'm getting, or like the package covering losses and victories. And, and if I am seeing, sometimes I do watch Russian TV, it's it's a special taste. You have a patience it takes. But, you actually can distinguish propaganda if everything is good or everything is bad, this either or, if you hear only positive message, you get suspicious. And if you get only negative message, you get suspicious. So maybe I'm optimistic as a person, I am, but what I see from state communication in Ukraine, there is a mixture. So I have no knowledge and no way to say whether there were 1,000, 2,000 or 3,000 of killed or wounded or what, on this. But I'm hearing messages that here is the advance, this is we lost, there, killed, we lost, there we taken. So I see that the general composition is diverse, and that's probably, there are different content, and from that comes something which resembles, I don't know, you wouldn't say trust, but at least some outlines of transparency, or something that fills the request of critical. Because again, propaganda, it's about either or. It's either only good or only bad, depending on what message you are sending to what audience. And that's actually something that heritage, not only heritage studies, but any humanities, is a basic tool.
Thank you, Cornelius. Sofia, and I think we have time for two more questions, and one is for Katerina. A question by Tiki. The question is that what are the mechanisms that Russian will pay for what they have done, and how realistic are these mechanisms in practice?
Well, I briefly mentioned at least 3 avenues for the legal proceedings that Ukraine entertains. The proceedings concerning the individual criminal responsibility of top military and possibly civilian commanders from Russia, or actually they will concern all sides to the conflict at the International Criminal Court. Then there is a possibility of the universal jurisdiction proceedings, which would be the likes of the Syria-related proceedings in Germany or in Switzerland or in Sweden, when because of the gravity of the crimes, of the alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity and potentially the crime of aggression, other states can investigate and prosecute Russian officials for their conduct. Of course, there's still a possibility of such proceedings in Ukraine. There have been massive criminal proceedings concerning the alleged war crimes perpetrated in occupied Crimea and in Donbass, led by Ukrainian law enforcement professionals. And even now we see the reports from the Office of the Prosecutor General that they keep monitoring the situation and opening the proceedings. So these are the mechanisms. There is, of course, also the possibility of a specialized tribunal, like the likes we had for the former Yugoslavia or Rwanda or different hybrid tribunals. As regards the compensations and payment, much will be, of course, dependent on on the political infrastructure and actually the social attitude to the proceedings and the state of affairs in Russia. But also the requests or the calls have been voiced publicly already with respect to freezing Russian property abroad, including certain bank resources abroad, and then redirecting those assets for restoration and compensation, basically for the reparations to Ukraine. These are the options that have been named. How these things are going to pan out, of course, nobody can say at the moment, including as regards Russia's compliance, which is, on the one hand can be predictable. On the other hand, we should see how these multitude proceedings pan out, because on the 7th or 8th of March, as you also know, the International Court of Justice will start will hear the new case brought by Ukraine against Russia concerning basically the distortion of the concept of genocide and what does it mean for international law and what further steps Russia is bound to take. I think this is also going to be a very seminal decision which will impact Russia's conduct further.
Okay, and I think there is one last question, and I suggest that all our speakers reflect briefly on that. And the question is an anonymous question, but here it is. What are the first steps that will need to be taken post-conflict? So how do you see the situation in heritage domain after the end of the war? Cornelius, would you like to start?
Okay, I would answer that with a view on the long-term implications and what will happen sort of down the line. The most important thing, as I see it, involves how to bring back the Russian population into the European community. And maybe they've never been part of it for a great deal, but at the moment, as Ukraine fights a war, and many or all European nations are supporting them in different ways, This seems to be a very important part, and most, or most maybe not, but many Russians do not even support this war. So, and there are lots of cultural links between Ukraine and Russia. So it's not the most difficult task, maybe, to open avenues of conversation and discussion and find commonalities also with them, because Europe cannot do without Russia, and they are part of our community in this part of the world. So, and that will be difficult, but that's what is needed.
Thank you, Sofia.
You know, I think, okay, I will start from on the ground and then move up to the sphere we just Cornelius brought into. I think that, you know, people will act from where they are. It would mean different small actions, whether clearing rubble of destroyed buildings and taking things that were hidden in storages, reconnecting to like communication and in this digital infrastructure. So there will be these small steps involving like rebuilding lives and function, and I think reorienting to peace, because, you know, like theater will become again a theater, not a shelter, and will take time. So, and I think that we also have to keep in mind this little physical acts that people going, not only these large stories of international, and appreciate that, appreciate this individual actions. I am, you know, while in the longer term, I do agree that Europe needs Russia, but I think that Europe actually needs to rethink what Europe is. It has lots of imperial legacies, and this imperial legacy is not only about colonialism and slavery, it's about the way we see certain cultures and we don't see others. And it's the way the knowledge is circulating. The attention is, the attention on Ukraine is because we are bombed. And attention on Russia is because it has Hermitage. You know, you see the difference? So I think actually we need Hermitage in cities like Volnovakha focus. You actually need to think how this global field of culture is so much needs to unlearn. I mean, I just was reading and resonates Ariela Azoulay. We need to unlearn imperialism. And I think it actually does resonate a lot with the heritage, because heritage as this field is very much enrooted from its very beginning in colonial practices. So I think that's actually something a lot to do. So I think that, you know, Europe needs to learn about Ukraine, and to that matter also to other countries which are not imperial centers historically, not geopolitical powers, that they matter not only when they are bombed. And while it will be very crucial to talk with Russia, and actually I'm keeping with some people communication personal, I don't know, I mean, we can talk with Volodymyr, as I'm now accepting in Lviv, a city which is not under fire, people from Kiev and Kharkiv, I find that they are much less inclined to talk with Russians than I am, because my home is not yet bombed. So I think this also very long distance in assumption that over there people are brothers and because they are close, because this is what we imagine about them. I think we will need to rethink that, and I think that it will take time. And in the end, I very much hope that this will be a world which is much more, not only in solidarity, but in partnership conversation and not condescending. And that I think that heritage can be one of the fields where we can practice and figure out how to do that. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much, Sofia. Katerina?
Thank you. Well, several points. First, I do agree with Sofia that it's very important to be noticed and to get attention and solidarity and support, not only when acute danger towards that other threatens you, or that acute danger reaches certain escalation, that raises the attention, because the armed conflict has been there for years, and the level of scholarly and political attention, unfortunately, definitely was not enough. This is the first thing. The second thing, I do also believe in these small actions of every single person who try to do their best in their place, in their position, in their professional and personal capacity. And it is very important to stress this personal human dimension of not just the armed conflict, but of the humans' response to the conflict, and not to speak just about the important, of course, but state solidarity with Ukraine. And I think Ukraine and Ukrainian professionals, and this has been often said, especially within the framework of the Crimea platform, Ukraine has not really developed its position on Russia's neo-imperialism, and it hasn't infused this debate into the larger colonial and neo-imperial international debates, because the Western countries do engage with their painful colonial legacy, not in a perfect way, but we see the initiatives of the top officials in Germany and France willing to return cultural heritage, whereas Russia does exactly the opposite, and that has already been visible in occupied Crimea, even before President Putin's announcement last week. So Ukraine should really engage into these larger debates about imperialism and neo-imperialism, and show to the countries just the wider picture of why we have what's happening in Ukraine now, because there is such a big historical and cultural fabric to it. These are my points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we reached the end of our panel discussion. Our intention was to initiate the discourse and to raise questions. And I think this panel was really successful in this respect. Questions starting from the very local to the level of global. And we also have many people among our attendees who shared various initiatives and ideas how to act. So I think this panel also serves as some kind of point of connection. And I can offer this, that the Cultural Heritage Studies program at CEU can be this point of connection. So if you would like to share any initiative and you are searching for contacts, we can help you in this also, because we feel that we are really close to Ukraine, both spatially and in terms of our network. Yeah, I think this is what I have to say to our panelists. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. And Sofia and Katerina, if any help is needed, turn to us. We will reach out also to our panelists, and the recording of this panel will be available, so you can all share it in your networks. And yeah, I agree with Lucy Middleton, who just posted. I hope that everyone keeps safe and well. And thank you for the panel. And my last words are an invitation that in less than an hour, we have another event on inclusive museums, discussion with Kathleen Cinnamon-Legutko, director of the Museum of Illinois State, on inclusive museums. She's the author of Inclusive Museum Readers. So if you are interested in this, please join us to our Cultural Leadership conversations as well. Thank you very much. And yeah, our heart is with Ukraine and our mind.
Thank
Goodbye.
You. See you soon. Bye-bye.